As many of you know, I got to go to Sarasota, Florida this past summer. At the time of this recording, it's August 2023, and I was invited to talk at a women's health summit in Sarasota, Florida, with some friends of mine. Now, friends that have been in the business with me for many years. We have spoken online several times, but we had never actually met in person. And so we took the leap of faith and we decided that's it. We are going to get an Airbnb together and spend 4 solid days, or maybe 5, I can't remember now, 4 or 5 days together living in a house, even some of us sharing the same bed. Which I think is so funny.
Yeah.
And see what comes about. And I remember I told my husband before I went, it was like a week before I left, and I was like, what am I doing? Like, what if I don't like these women in person? I'm like, I was sure I would, but I was like, when you living with somebody is completely different than, just being friends with them. It's taking things to a different level. And I'm like, you know what? I think is going to be fine. I think it's going to be like a mastermind of business women all together. And that's exactly what it was like. It was like best friends. Like, it was like we had known each other our whole lives. Like, we had lived together already. We all come together in this house. And it was like we could not stop talking. We talked late into the night, every single day, all day long. We didn't shut up. And one of those fabulous women was my friend, Nat Niddam, who's with us here today. Hi, Nat.
I'm so excited to be here. I just wish that we were in person again.
I know.
Look, Karen Martell and I hit it off so big that we got the same swimsuit. Well, I mean, not the exact, I mean, we bought the same swimsuit, as in I have my own, she has her own, but they are the same swimsuit.
Yes.
And she forgave me for buying the same swimsuit as her in the same color.
And which you rocked, by the way.
Oh, and you, sister.
I love it. Yes, it was such a cute little, like, it was like shiny blue. Oh my God, it was great. I'm sure your husband really liked it. You got the more cheeky bottom and you looked amazing in it, just so you know.
Thank you. I haven't worn it much.
So now you came on the podcast months ago, which was when we first met. That was back in January. So in January of this year, you and I connected through friends, mutual friends, and you came on my podcast to talk about just regular old peptides because you are the peptide queen and you know a lot about them. And even then you were like, I'm going to have to come back on and talk about bioregulator peptides. And I really wanted since then get you back on to talk about them, because this is something that's been, I feel like, I don't know about you, but in the last year has really exploded. Bioregulator peptides, like peptides, they've been a couple of years, but bioregulators, to me, it seems like it's, just coming about where people are talking about it more. But it's kind of this like elusive, like, what are they? Like, what can they do? So I'm excited to have you talk about them. But before we get going, another reason I wanted to ask you to come on is something that we talked about down in Sarasota a lot, was your upcoming retreat. And I thought, oh my gosh, I want to share this with my listeners because they are really into this stuff, and what you're offering sounds amazing. I was just talking to my assistant, Jessica, about it, and she's in your group, and she was like, I want to go to Nat's retreat so bad. I'm like, me too. Doesn't it just sound like it would be so amazing? And now that I've spent a week with you, I want to share with all of these women that, hey, you guys can spend 5 days also with Nat down in sunny Dominican Republic.
So and you don't have to wear the same swimsuit.
Exactly.
And you get your own bed.
And it's, what's funny too is coming back, like Pam, the other lady that works for me, she keeps saying to me, what did you learn from Nat? I want to know everything. And I was like, oh, well, I started myself a Nat recommendation list because the whole time I was there, you just know so much about so many things and supplements and biohacking things that I had to start a list so I could be like, start checking on all of these things and these different little like supplements and whatever else you shared with me, links. And so I have my Nat list. So this is what your retreat is really all about, is like bringing these women together to teach them all the things that they can do for anti-aging. And you get to spend this beautiful 5 days together and do yoga. So before we even get started, I want you to share about your retreat, because I think more women need to be going down there and doing it. If
Oh,
I could,
thanks,
I
Karen.
would.
I just want everybody to know, like, spending time with Karen in person is a gift. I mean, I've never
Thank you.
laughed so hard and learned so much. And it was just, it really was like this mastermind kind of girl chat. You know, we had with us Danny Hamilton and Molly, although Molly was a couple days delayed.
Yeah.
But you know, it was just an amazing connection between women. And I will say that this women's longevity and resilience retreat, before anything else, it's community, right? It's
Yes.
connecting with women who are
That's
on the
why.
same page of you.
Yes.
And so many of the women I talk to who call up, you know, to learn about the retreat and who end up coming, most of them think their friends think they're completely crazy. They really don't have anyone to talk to because, you know, everybody thinks they're nuts. They're not necessarily experts in biohacking, but they're interested in it. They're interested in all this health optimization, fine tuning your diet, your nutrition, your supplements. What about these red light things? What about those PMF things? Like, what about all that stuff and the peptides and the bioregulators? And they're looking to connect with a community of like-minded women. And it's what happens over and over again. Like the first 2 retreats we did last year, the second one we did at the biohacking conference, right before the John Lawrence event that you and I did, 8 of the 10 women that were at the last retreat all came and had like a little reunion. So these are women
Wow.
who were total strangers. They spent 5 days together and they all came to this big biohacking event, partially because they wanted to go to the biohacking event, but also like they kind of hung out. They went for
Yeah.
dinner. It's a really amazing thing to see. So yeah, so we do a 5-day longevity and resilience retreat. I host it with my co-host. Her name is Dasha Maximov. She is amazing. Her zone of genius is the whole resilience piece and brain health, that kind of thing. And we just, you know, it's, and I will say that as much as I'm teaching and Dasha's teaching, it is an exchange of knowledge and wisdom and information. Because here's the news, ladies, you all have wisdom. And every presentation that we do ends up being interactive because every woman in that room has her own experience to bring to the table. They've read stuff, they've looked into things. And sometimes they're not even biohackers, but they bring their own life experience to it. So it's really great. But so, you know, we spend a couple of hours a day in these sessions where we do these big downloads, but we're doing sunrise walks on the beach. Before the retreat even happens, we do genetic testing and everybody gets their biological age tested. And then I kind of go through those results. We do a one-on-one session during the retreat. We do Zoom calls before the retreat, after the retreat. Like it's kind of like a gift that keeps on giving, right? So
It gives me shivers.
yeah, we have chefs that cook our food for us because, you know, Dasha and I are both control freaks and we want full control over the food and the fats and the this and the that.
Where do you stay?
So we stay in these beautiful little townhomes right on the ocean.
Wow.
So you literally could walk around in a sarong and a t-shirt or a swimsuit for 5 days. Nobody would have a problem with it.
Yeah.
So literally that sunrise walk on the beach involves throwing whatever on, walking downstairs. We meet at the top of the stairs and down we go to the beach. And some days the yoga instructor comes to us and there's a beautiful platform overlooking the ocean. Or we go to the yoga instructor and she's built this gorgeous yoga platform kind of in the jungle. And the cool thing about the Dominican Republic where we are is, you know, unlike Costa Rica, where everything from the ants to the trees is trying to kill you and eat you, the Dominican Republic, there's no natural predators. The worst thing you'll come across is a mosquito.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't either because we do a waterfall hike. And I remember being on this waterfall hike saying, you know, do I have to look out? Because, you know, you're in Costa Rica, you got to watch out for the fer de lance snake, which is like the most toxic snake on the planet. Or, you know, I was walking in the jungle in Costa Rica once and the guide puts his arm out and says, don't put your foot down. And I'm like, what happened? And it was like, there was a column of these ants, these fire ants going across the path. And if you stepped on it, you would be swarmed by ants and bitten to bits. And anyway, so I asked our guide, George, like, George, what do I need to look out for? And he goes, here's the cool thing about the DR. There's no predators.
Wow.
There's no venomous snakes. There's like nothing. So it's just really nice, And so anyway, so quite apart from the fact that there's no killer animals, we do a waterfall hike, and we just spend 5 days, and every woman is able to really decompress, focus on herself, fill her cup, right? In whatever way she needs, so that she comes out of it kind of refreshed and restored. The retreat includes 2 body treatments, one of which is this resistance stretch session, which is like an hour and a half of a cross between like a Thai massage and a stretch, and it's a crazy kind of modality that's amazing. People experience both physical and emotional releases. We have, of course, we have massage. Like, anyway, it's all the things. So if anybody's interested in this, just reach out to me.
I'll put the link in the show notes, like wherever they have to go.
Just go to my, and or go to my website, like any of those things.
Because you do not allow just anybody, and it's not like you have unlimited seating. It's like there's a certain number.
Yeah, we're down to the last few spots. So we don't have many spots left, but we do have a couple, and we'd love to fill them. We have a maximum of 10 women who can come. And you had asked about the accommodations. They're townhomes. Each townhome houses 2 women, and one gets the ocean view room, one gets the garden view room, and the townhome has like a kitchen on the main floor. Not that you're going to be doing any cooking, but it's there. The bedrooms are on the 2nd floor. There's a bathroom in between. And then on the top floor, my favorite, you have a rooftop patio with an outdoor shower.
It's absolutely amazing. And it's going to be exactly like how when I left Sarasota, where I like cried because I had to come down off my endorphin high from the week.
Yeah.
It was like leaving camp as a kid. So if you've ever gone to camp as a kid, that's when you have this connection with women, you don't realize how much you need it. Like, I've got girlfriends, but this was completely different because you're with these like-minded people that, like you said, if I talked the way I talk with you guys, with some of these women around my neighborhood, they think I was a nut bar. They wouldn't have no clue what I was talking about. Like, bioregulators, what the heck is that?
Exactly. You did what? Why?
Yes.
What do you mean?
Right?
Why would you jump into a tub full of ice? Nobody does that. That's not normal.
Exactly. So it'll be like that. I'm sure that when these women leave after 5 days of being with you and being with all of these women, it's going to be like, oh my gosh, my cup is filled and I am sad that I have to leave.
Yeah.
But I'm coming back next year is what it'll be.
Yeah, 100%.
I will be there. I promise one day I'm coming, because this year I just can't, or else I would come to it 100%, but I've got a little child. So, well, he's 9. I can't leave him. So, his dad works. So, or I would 100% be there.
When he's 10.
Yes, exactly. Next year.
Okay.
Okay. So
we'll
let's
put it out to the universe. Let's get into bioregulators.
Let's bioregulators.
Let's talk about the topic at hand.
Yes. Okay. So if you guys haven't yet, please go back, listen to our first episode. I'll link to it in the show notes so that you can at least get an idea of what peptides are if you haven't listened to that. So explain the difference between peptides and bioregulator peptides.
Great. So they're not that different. They're both amino acid chains. They're small. The main difference is that the physical difference, if you will, is that the bioregulator is at most 4 amino acids in length. It's anywhere from 2 to 4 amino acids long. And they're really interesting because it's not just a string of 4 amino acids. It's also the way that they're oriented. Like it's a very intricate thing for a tiny little compound. The peptides we talked about last time can be up to 50 amino acids long. So they're much more complex. It's a more complex protein, if you will, in some ways. And those guys are more like cellular signaling molecules, right? Which isn't to say that some of them don't have the function of flipping genes on and off, But for the bioregulator peptide, that is ultimately what they do. They are able to cross the cell membrane, get into the nucleus, bind to your DNA in very specific configurations in a very specific spot. And that initiates the production of proteins and different processes. So what they are is ultimately an epigenetic switch. You guys have probably heard of epigenetics. It's anything from the outside, and actually it could even be stress from the inside, but anything that affects the way that your genes express themselves. And so the bioregulator peptide is a signal to your genes to flip on or off, depending on what the bioregulator is and what it's there to do.
And so do regular peptides switch genes on and off?
Some do. So you've got like the copper peptide, GHK or GHKCU. That guy switches over 1,000 genes. That is a crazy peptide. Yeah. And it flips genes. It flips on your youthful genes and flips down aging genes. It's really interesting, right? I know that even BPC 157 has some effect on certain genes. There's a little bit of, but they affect genes in a different way. I don't think that BPC 157 actually gets into the nucleus because it's too big. So these bioregulator peptides, what's interesting is they can be taken orally. Number one, because they're tiny. And number two, because they're native to your body. We naturally make them. We just don't make as many of them as we get older. And then when you have an imbalance in the body, you might need to introduce more to compensate for an imbalance. If that makes any sense. Right?
Yeah, no, I think it does.
And the integrity of that chain is protected because it has to do with the cleavage sites. So the way that the body breaks down proteins has to do with the connectors. Right. So if your kid had like those games that had those balls that connected, so there's certain connectors that can be split and others that are solid. And so the way the bioregulator occurs in nature is that there's cleavage sites on either side of that 2 to 4 amino acid chain. So they can be extracted. They can almost be cleaved off of a fuller protein, and then they get passage through the gut into the bloodstream, and they go from there.
Yeah, because normal peptides are too big typically to be swallowed, correct?
Typically, but you get peptide like BPC 157, which shouldn't be bioavailable orally, but because it's native to the gut, it has a hall pass.
Okay.
So BPC 157 is naturally secreted in your gastric juice.
Okay. So I didn't know any of that. Okay, great. Where do they come from in comparison to where regular peptides come from? Because it's two different places where they're derived.
So your BPC 157, CJC, all those guys, those are fragments of proteins that are naturally occurring in the body, and they are synthesized in labs. Okay. Right. So they're
made in
chemicals
labs.
there's chemicals that are synthesized. They're what's the word I'm looking for? They're synthetic.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Your bioregulator peptide can be synthetic, or it can be an extract from actual tissue, that gland or tissue from an animal. Most commonly, it's been cows, but it could be from pig or from sheep. There are some that are sheep. But basically, these are fragments of proteins that are naturally occurring in all those tissues and glands. And so they have a process by which they extract them, and they're encapsulated. So they're put into a capsule. So those are taken orally. So those are like the biologic form, if you will, the food form. The synthetic form can be synthesized in a lab. Very complex procedure, actually. There aren't that many labs yet that are able to synthesize them. And those can be administered either subcutaneously through an injection, or increasingly, they can be taken in sublingual drops.
Okay.
So there's, you've got these guys working, these little men in lab coats trying to figure out, nobody likes needles. How are we going to make these bioavailable? The cool thing is they're so small, you can let them sit under your tongue, and you've got a lot of blood flow there. Under the tongue is very, very vascular. And so it's a very common way to administer even medications. And so you hold it under the tongue and it gets absorbed straight into the bloodstream, bypasses the gut completely. So that's your synthetic bioregulator. And then, like I said, you have the biologic. There's a third form that is only really available in Russia. And that is the extract from the tissue, gland, and organ that's been prepared and purified so that it can be injected intramuscularly. And that's the form that actually the man who is, holds the banner for having discovered and developed these over the last 40 years, that's the strategy that he used in his elderly studies. He actually gave them the intramuscular shot and got incredible results for, in terms of mortality. Because, in animal studies, because mice and rats only live a couple of years, you can do how much longer do they live. Humans live too long for it to be practical to see how much longer they live. So we look to see how much sooner do they die.
Right. Yeah.
It's a little tweak.
Yeah. They sound like organ glandulars. And we know that that's become very popular too, where you can, heart and soil. And there's a bunch of them where you can, get thymus gland, you can get liver gland, and it's all from cows or pigs. So how does that differ from those glandulars?
That's a good question. I mean, look, my theory is that those organ extracts, those dehydrated, desiccated organ extracts. So I think, there's two different things. You've got your glandulars that you will get from a supplement company where you've got adrenal glandular or thyroid glandular. And those typically you can, you have to be careful who you give them to because they can drive things into overdrive, right?
Yeah.
The desiccated organs that we're getting from companies like you just mentioned, there's actually Paleo Valley now makes some of those organ supplements. You've got Heart and Soil, you've got Ancestral supplements. So they're literally taking the organ, desiccating it, drying it out, and smushing it into a powder and throwing it in a capsule. And people get transformative benefits from that. I think there's bioregulator in there. Like for sure, there's some bioregulator.
There would be.
The difference, for sure, 100%, and a bunch of cofactors and other stuff. The bioregulator peptides that you buy that are bioregulator peptides, they're further refined, and you get a higher concentration, if you will, of that actual bioregulator.
Yeah.
So it's a stronger effect than the synthetic. So it's going to lack some of the cofactors that are naturally going to be present in the extract, but it's going to be like, in some ways, a much faster, harder dose harder hitting dose than even the biologics. So what they'll do in Russia, where they use these quite a lot in clinics and whatnot, is they will sometimes use the synthetic first just to move the needle, and then they'll follow it up with the oral bioregulator. And what I've read is that the synthetic produces a quicker result, but not as long lasting necessarily, whereas the capsule, like the actual organ supplement, is a bit slower to act, but the results last a little longer maybe.
It reminds me of thyroid. So you can get thyroid glandular over the counter. And like there's one, Forefront Health, that I use all the time with my clients. And it's weak. And people are like, well, can't I just take that instead of desiccated prescription thyroid medication, which is also from the animal, from the thyroid. But there's a big difference. The medication desiccated thyroid is much more concentrated. So I wish somebody would do a study kind of comparing what it does to the system from an over-the-counter thyroid glandular, the medication, prescription grade desiccated thyroid, which has all the cofactors in it, and then the thyroid bioregulator, to see what the difference between the three would be.
Well, I'll tell you one main difference, and that is that with the bioregulator, you can give that to someone who's either hyper or hypothyroid, and it's going to help them.
Wow.
So what the bioregulator does, or what the effect of the bioregulator is, not to anthropomorphize them, but what the effect of the bioregulator is to bring the body back to homeostasis. And so
like an adaptogen.
Exactly. So whether a person is hyper or hypothyroid, both populations can use that thyroid bioregulator.
Okay.
One thing and people get really excited when I talk about this, and they're like, oh my God, I'm going to be able to throw away my thyroid medication and never take it again. And unfortunately, it doesn't work that way, right? And I think in large part, it probably depends on how damaged the thyroid is, how long you've had issues, what's driving the issue. Like, but I will say that there are people who've had slightly underperforming thyroids who've used the thyroid bioregulator for a few months, who've reported back that they've been able to wean themselves off their meds. I do not recommend doing that without working with a physician.
Yeah.
Just going to put it
me
out
too.
there. But I will say that I've got a pretty big community on Facebook right now, and in that community, there are incredible stories of people really kind of healing crazy things in their bodies. And they've woven these bioregulators into their protocol. So they're not using them in isolation necessarily, but they're using them as part of an overall protocol. Yeah. And even in the literature, like you've got the books now, Karen, you'll notice in the literature, they talk about, taking a population of people with COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, let's say. One group gets conventional treatment. The other group gets the conventional treatment plus the bioregulator. And almost without fail, the second group does better and ends up getting better results and longer lasting results, and even sometimes needing less meds than the people that are just getting the medication.
So it sounds probably to everybody, it's like, what are these things? Well, they're like new on the scene, but they've been around for 40 years. So that's a long time. And there's actually been a lot of study on them. Tell us how they came about, they're out of Russia, as you said. So why is it that the Russians decided 40 plus years ago that these needed to be developed? And why isn't the world caught on to this? Like,
well, part of it, I think, is because where they're coming from. I mean,
yeah.
Russia is part of
things to themselves.
Well, it's a part of a group of countries, they're kind of like they're crazy. They're incredible scientists. They're super, they've got an incredible culture, scientific culture. And they're not always super forthcoming, right? It's not like the Americans who are like, oh, look what I found. That's that kid that goes, check out what I found. Whereas the Russians are like, ooh, this is cool. I'm putting that in my pocket.
This over here.
And we'll see what's going to happen. Well, it's a little, the cultures are different, let's just say. And so about 40 years ago, the Russian military approached a young doctor in the military by the name of Vladimir Kafatin and said, look, our soldiers are coming back from, let's say nuclear submarines, a hot mess, because at the time, like, they weren't insulated properly. The cosmonauts are coming back from space, a hotter mess because they're accelerated aging. They were concerned about some of the weapons that Western countries, I don't know if it was specifically Americans, probably in those days, but that Western countries were developing that, like, lasers that could damage the eyes. And they basically tasked this young guy with saying, you need to figure out a way to fix it. And he's kind of like, really? And they're like, yeah. And here's the deal. You can have all the money you want. We've got factories filled with people who are broken that you get to test your shit on. And sorry, I keep saying that word on podcasts. I apologize.
You're allowed to say the S word, not the F word on here.
Okay, no F bombs. Okay, so basically they said to him, and he even says today, you could not reproduce the experiments today that he did then. Of course, he developed everything. He tested everything on animals first. They did a lot of really interesting computer modeling that is magic, right? Like they're able to show, like, a DNA helix in the presence of a bioregulator, how it kind of unwinds, and the bioregulator binds to it in a 3D way, and that's what stimulates the production of these proteins. Like, it's super cool.
Yes.
But it all came out of military research.
Okay.
And so and then it trickled down. And so in Russia, you can go into a drugstore and buy bioregulators. Right. We can't do that here. They're barely,
it's hard to find them. Yeah.
They're hard to find. Right. So anyway, so that's basically what happened. And then some of the most powerful research that Kafatin did, one study that was really, there were a couple of studies. So one of them on animals, on rats, He exposed male and female rats to 24-hour light, right? So, and these are rats, these are Worcester rats. These are rats that are prone to developing tumors and cancers and whatnot. And in both cases, the population that got the bioregulators either had much fewer tumors, or they were smaller, or they didn't develop tumors at all. It was crazy. So he takes this a step further and he says, okay, we can't really do this on humans exactly. Like, we can't take a bunch of people with tumors and see what happens. I mean, now they probably do, but they couldn't. And we're not going to measure how much longer people live, because A, there's too much variation, and B, people live too long for this to be practical. So we're going to see if we can impact how soon people die, right? We're looking at mortality rate. So he had, I think it was about somewhere between 230 and 250 people. He called them, I think they were the old people, and then there were the elderly people. But anyway, so 45 to 55, 45-year-olds were the Gazprom group. I think these were 65 to 75-year-olds. And this was a 12-year study. And he had his test subjects got provitamins, like the control group got provitamins, and the test group got epithalamin, which is that injectable form of the pineal gland bioregulator.
Okay.
Did I talk about that yet?
No, but we will. Like, I want to talk
we
about
will.
the kinds of bioregulators and which organs.
Okay. So basically, half his people got the polyvitamin and the other half got the pineal gland bioregulator. And then he followed up with them after 6 years, and then he followed up with them after 12 years.
Maybe just quickly say what the pineal gland is for those that don't know.
Pineal gland, pine nut shaped gland in the brain. It's in the center of your brain. It controls your circadian cycle. It controls your melatonin production. It secretes an enzyme. Hang on just a second. Can we pause? Yeah, the pineal gland. So pineal gland also activates an enzyme called telomerase, which maintains and lengthens your telomeres. Telomeres are the ends of those shoelaces at the end of your DNA. If they get too short, your DNA can't replicate, like it can't replicate itself, and so the cell will die. So, of course, you don't want super long telomeres, because that's what cancer cells have. But what telomerase does when it's activated by the pineal gland is that it just helps to keep that at a healthier length.
And that's a sign of aging, correct?
Correct. Excuse me. Oh, I'm just a barrel of laughs today. I apologize. Sorry. Anyway, so I said telomerase, melatonin production, and the last thing about the pineal gland that's super impressive is that it is the master endocrine regulator. So from a downstream effect, it can help to balance the entire endocrine system.
Hormonal system, ladies.
Yeah. Now, once again, people, ladies, let's not run off and just pop some Apeiron and say, oh, my hormones are perfect now. I mean, I hope for you that they are, but it doesn't exactly work that way. But it kind of has this sort of downstream effect. So half the group got the pineal gland bioregulator in the form of epithalamin, and then the other half the group got the polyvitamins. And the results were crazy. At the end of 12 years, the group that got the pineal gland bioregulator had like half the mortality rate of the all-cause mortality versus those poor suckers that just got polyvitamins. So next he said, okay, this is super cool. Now let's go look at the super old people, like the 75 to 85-year-olds. We don't expect them to live as long, so this will be only a 6-year study. And he did 3 groups this time. His first group got polyvitamins, second group got the pineal gland bioregulator, and the third group got the pineal gland bioregulator plus the thymus bioregulator. So the thymus is that gland under your sternum that is the seat of your immunity, really. And it's a gland that starts to involute as we age. By the time we're 50 or 60 years old, it's just like a little lump of fat, right? Wow. Now, it's done its work. You still have an immune system, the whole 9 yards. But if we can rejuvenate that thymus gland, it improves our immune system. And if you think about it, if you think about a lot of the elderly people that we know, they will die from an immune system that either isn't working or is overworking or something. We're starting to understand inflammation is at the root of all evil. Immune dysfunction is right there with it. Like this is a major issue.
Yeah. We're in an
So,
epidemic of immune problems right now, especially for women.
100%.
Like autoimmune conditions are on the rise like crazy.
100%. So he only followed these guys for 6 years, but at the end of 6 years, the group, there was 88% mortality in the polyvitamin group. So they didn't do so well. These people all lived in Siberia, by the way. So they were not living in the lap of luxury. They had a pretty tough life. The second group that got the pineal gland bioregulator, I believe, I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but they did way better than the polyvitamin group. You know, they had, if those guys had an 88% mortality, maybe these guys had 60 something percent mortality. But the group that got the epithalamin and the thymolin, those guys had 33% mortality. Like these are big, big differences. So it makes one stand up and take notice and say, wait a minute. And if you look at, there's some more information about these people, and it showed that they had better bone density, their immune function was better, their sense of well-being was better. They didn't get sick as often, like their immune function was better. Like they just had a better life, right? They had access to better health span.
Yeah. And I read about this study prior to this, and it was a study on 11,000 people, which that's a
different one.
That's a different one. Okay. Well, that one was amazing too.
Yeah. That's Gazprom. So yeah.
So you're talking about maybe the Tractor Factory one.
No,
it was
I'm talking about the elderly one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, I don't even have that one on there. Yes.
Yeah.
Which the guy said that there has been some of the largest studies on bioregulators that have ever been done in studies. So that's no small potatoes. That is huge. So it's not like these are just willy-nilly out there just in Russia. There has been some serious and very well done studies on this. And I want you to talk about the one with the 11,000 employees in freaking Siberia, which is very harsh conditions.
Yeah. So this is Gazprom, which is a company that still exists. Like Gazprom is their big gas company in Siberia. I think it's natural gas company. And they took 11,000 people. And those guys didn't get shots. He separated out his polyvitamin crew, and then the crew that got the bioregulators, they got the oral bioregulators, the same ones we can buy today. And they were given, I believe it was 5. So I'm pretty sure in their case, he didn't use the pineal gland bioregulator. He used pinealon. So pinealon is a central nervous system kind of brain bioregulator. It also has effect on the pineal gland, but it has a broader ranging effect on the brain. Okay. They got the blood vessel bioregulator and thymus. So that's 3. I want to say they gave them lung and one other one. I can't remember exactly what the
heart,
other one
maybe
was. Maybe heart. I mean, that would make sense. And again, like after 6 years, they didn't get sick as often. From the factory's perspective, their productivity went up. They didn't take off as many sick days. Right. They did better work. They felt better. And so overall, it was a massive success, right? It supported the immune system. And a lot of these people, like if you know anything about, your run-of-the-mill blue-collar Russian population.
Yeah, they weren't healthy. People,
well, they're not, it's interesting. Like they're hardy people, but they're hard drinking, smoking, kind of living in Siberia in very harsh conditions, which, you might say could be good for your health because you're pushing your body to adapt all the time. But the smoking, probably not
drinking
so
of vodka. Yeah. They did a 1, 6, and 12-year follow-up. So that was pretty extensive too. And they did find the people that were on the peptides had a third of the disease that the other ones had. So a third, which is the same outcome as the last study you just talked about. It was about a third, right? Of what everybody else got, they didn't get. That's like...
And what's fascinating about this stuff is it's all tapping into the body's own systems for healing. right?
Yeah.
It's not like a drug that's coming in and blocking a pathway or pushing something else. It's literally just activating the body's, next to stem cells, right?
Right.
It's another modality that allows us to tap into our body's own healing mechanisms, which is pretty fascinating and
It
super
is.
interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
it's, and but I do want to impress on people, they don't work like drugs necessarily, but I
Mhm.
have seen some pretty incredible stuff. I have seen, in an older gentleman who was getting up to go to the bathroom multiple times a night, probably because his prostate was a little enlarged, taking the prostate bioregulator, and I think it was prostate and blood vessel. And within a month saying, wow, I don't have to get up as often at night. Like it's pretty remarkable how every once in a while, like, or young women who are still cycling, but who've lost their cycle for whatever reason, they're doing all the things, nothing's working. They layer in the pineal gland bioregulator and the ovarian bioregulator, and they get their cycle back.
Wow.
I
Yeah. I
mean,
had a woman in my group on Tuesday who said that because she had chemotherapy done,
mm,
her cycle went missing. And she was able to bring it back somewhat, but she said it was still really irregular. Like she wasn't doing well with her cycle or her hormones. She was only 40 years old. She had no estrogen. And I said, you know what? I'm interviewing Nat Niddam on Saturdays. I said, you got to listen to this podcast because maybe you should be taking, with everything else that we're doing, you should consider taking the ovary bioregulator.
well, and for someone who's had radiation treatment, there's a couple of studies. You'll see it in the books that you have. Post radiation treatment, there's a couple of bioregulators. One is called Villon, and the other one, I think, there's another immune system bioregulator, probably thymus, where they will administer that after the fact to someone to help the immune system recover. Because what does radiation do? What does chemotherapy do? It
Yeah.
it saves us by virtually killing the bad stuff before the good stuff dies off. But a lot of your healthy cells are going to get damaged, right, or killed. In Russia, they use those bioregulator peptides extensively after the Chernobyl accident.
Wow.
Right? I mean, it
Which
obviously,
those
to
people were
someone who
so
had
sick.
massive, yeah,
Yeah.
for people who had massive radiation poisoning, it's not enough. Like there's too much damage is done. But for people who are a little further away, I mean, I have a good friend who was there and as a child and was given bioregulators. And she went on, I mean, she did a lot of healing and did a lot of work on
Yeah.
her body, but she went on to have a baby, which on
Yeah.
paper is not a thing,
Yeah.
right?
She told she couldn't have children too?
100%.
Yeah.
100.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, like, she's still dealing with after effects. Like
Of
there's
course.
still stuff, but it is remarkable that to what degree she was able to heal her bodies to the point where she was able to have a baby.
That was a really good podcast. I listened to your interview with her. It was fascinating to
Yeah.
hear someone talk that was actually there and was exposed. That's like, it gives me shivers. But yeah, that's crazy. Now, there has been some studies in the US done by a man, Bill Lawrence, who has been on your podcast too. And he talks about these telomeres and the DNA methylation, which are all big words. People don't get what that is and how, is that important? And something that you're actually doing in your retreat coming up is you're going to be testing people's DNA methylation. So why do we want to do this? What does that mean? Tell us what's biological aging compared to chronological aging.
Yeah. So this is a really fascinating
It
field that
is.
is growing by leaps and bounds, right? So your chronological age is how many times around the sun have you been, right? What does it say on your driver's license, if you're being honest? Um, your biological age is what's the story that your cells are telling. Are you aging at the same rate as your chronological age? Are you aging more slowly, which is every biohacker's dream? We want to slow down our aging
Every woman's dream
process,
too.
right? Every woman's dream. We might want to reverse our age, right? We want to be getting younger as we get older, or we could be older cellularly from a cellular perspective than we are chronologically. And so there's a scientist by the name of Stephen Horvath that created this Horvat clock. And he talks about how if you are 7 years older than your chronological age biologically, you have a 50% higher chance of all-cause mortality than someone who is your age and is their age biologically and chronologically. By the same token, if you're 7 years younger, you have a 50% lower chance of all-cause mortality. And the great news is it's starting to become very apparent that, and not just with bioregulators, but there are ways of slowing down our pace of aging and possibly lengthening our telomeres. Now, the telomere thing is complicated because definitely we want not tiny little short telomeres because we're cooked, right? We don't want super long telomeres because then we might develop an undesirable disease. We want to maintain the length of our telomeres so that our DNA can replicate properly. You can affect the length of your telomeres through a number of different ways. One of them being using the pineal gland bioregulator, but also things like meditation happens to be really good for your telomeres, and it's free. So I'm just going to put it out there. You know, that meditation app on your phone, use it.
Yeah.
Get on it, right?
Because stress is one of the biggest reasons
stress is one of the
shorten
biggest,
your telomeres.
100%. Stress will be one of the most aging things. Chronic stress that is not addressed, right?
Man,
so I don't want to freak
shit
people
together.
out. Yeah.
So stressed
I mean,
out. I got to practice what I preach.
100%, right? Like we live in a stressful world, and for the
do.
love of God, don't turn on the news before you go to bed, because you know, on your phone, on your like whatever, like my mom sometimes, she's like, oh, we're watching the news, we can't sleep. And I'm like, well, of course you can't sleep. How could you possibly
I don't watch the
sleep?
news. I can't.
She's like, well, we need to know what's going on. I'm like, actually, you don't. I mean, you do, but you don't, not right before bed. You don't. So anyway, I'm not to lecture you guys, you know, like it's of course we need to know what's happening in the world.
Yeah.
But developing the skill of protecting yourself or creating a buffer between you and those stresses, which is what meditation and mindfulness is all about. The stress isn't going to go away, folks. No. But how the stress affects you is what the part you can control to a degree. Anyway, having said that, the pineal gland bioregulator is an interesting hack for helping to maintain and lengthen our telomeres in an appropriate way. And so Bill Lawrence, in his clinical study, has now over 200 people. I'm actually one of them. And what he does is we measure our telomere and DNA methylation patterns. So DNA methylation is what Steve Horvat does, or talked about and developed, the Horvat clock. And then puts people on a regimen of bioregulator peptides and then remeasures every 14 to 16 months. So telomeres are much easier to lengthen. So after 6 months of being on a program, you may see a difference in your telomeres. He himself is now, I believe he's 76, maybe 77 years old. And he has telomeres that match up to that of a 30-year-old, I want to say.
Yep. No, you're right. Yep.
30.
I remember hearing on your podcast.
Yep.
Yeah. And before he did it, he was way ahead.
He was much older.
He was much older on the inside.
Mid-60s, and he was showing up like a mid to late 70s guy, or maybe 80s. The bigger thing for him was that he figured out that he came from a line of men in his family, not one of whom had lived past the age of 70. And this, he figured out, he found this out when he was in his mid-60s, and this is what sent him on a quest.
Yeah.
Right?
And he went over and worked with Kevinson, right?
He went to St. Petersburg and threw himself at Kevinson's feet and said, you need to work with me. He heard him speak at a conference, and he was like, no, I want to do what you do. Anyway, he said that Putin would come in and get bioregulators, or not himself personally, but his assistant would come in. No, he sends his people in. Yeah. Anyway, so all that to say that Bill has found now, it's been 4 years he's been doing this trial, and he's not asking people to change anything else. And isn't it that a lot of the people that are in the study are doctors? Because he had to ask like friends and like colleagues and stuff. Yeah. Well, so now there's a lot, mostly he's almost only taking doctors into the trial. He'll take a few concierge people. Oh, listen to your French accent. Well, I am French.
She is, yeah.
am French. He'll take a few, but yeah, he's working with people one-on-one. He develops a 12-month protocol, and you're taking anywhere from low to medium to high volume of bioregulators. So I'm usually using about 8 to 9 boxes a month.
Wow.
And it's kind of like, the internal rebuild. He'll ask questions about different health issues, or, maybe things that run in the family. Like right now, I'm feeling like my digestive system needs some extra help. So I'm really leaning into the pancreas, the liver, the stomach bioregulators. But, you're just cycling through those bioregulators, and he is finding, like, he's had people reverse their telomere age by, like, I think it's an average of 20 years.
Wow. And
It's
are you
remarkable.
willing to share yours?
So mine is interesting. So the first time I did mine, I was 14 years younger
Yeah.
than my chronological age. The second time I did it, I actually lost some ground.
Okay.
I was only 8 years younger. And so,
Because of stress, I bet.
well, maybe stress, and
Just
maybe
because your
there's a
business has
theory.
gotten like so much busier, right?
Yeah, maybe stress, and maybe there's a certain virus around that may or may not have caused some damage to people's
Yes.
DNA. And so what'll be interesting in the next year or so, as I'm going through the process of repairing and restoring and doing more, all the things, is can I reclaim and go back to my 14-year gap and build on it, right? Which
Yes.
I'm fully believe that I can.
I think
But
so
I
too.
also, did some other testing and found out that I've got other under the hood, some of those mold things, like staying in moldy hotels, which has happened to me a couple of times this year. There was one hotel I stayed in Dallas, and it was a big chain hotel. You walked in the door and you got hit in the face with the smell of mold. And I was in
Oh,
there for 3 full days. Right.
yeah.
And when you've been traveling and your nervous system's a little tapped out, and you're going a little too hard. And that was when I recorded 30 episodes of somebody else's podcast over 2.5 days. So I was on a relentless schedule, and it's possible that that's when it really caught up to me. So, I think that being informed is important. I think the bioregulators are very interesting and very powerful. They're not the silver bullet.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I want everybody to really hear me on this. They are not a silver bullet. They are a really great tool, and I think, are at their most powerful when they're woven through a well-designed lifestyle, nutrition, all the things, protocols. And that's where you're going to see them really sing and deliver on results for
Yeah, it
people.
just seems like it would be such great support. And it's like nourishing the system when we do these detoxes and these harsh protocols for mold, for parasites, for Lyme, for whatever, just simple liver detoxification.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard on our body. Even taking boatloads of supplements is hard on our body.
Yeah.
So I feel like it really should be part of any of these protocols, because it's giving support and not taking away. It's giving this like nourishment and rebuilding of these very vital organs in our body.
Yeah. No, I'm 100%. I agree with that 100%. And I think that it's I think it's an exciting time, right?
Yes.
I think this is, and they're not cheap, but at the same time, it's about, I mean, for many of us, if we're fortunate enough to have a certain financial ability in our lives, they're accessible,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to be disrespectful of people who are struggling. I mean, right now, life has gotten really freaking expensive,
Yeah.
and for people. And so I would say, if you can't afford the bioregulators, then if you can find it in yourself to eat organ meats, that would be a really great other strategy, right? We've lost the nutrient density in our diets.
Yeah.
And reclaiming that nutrient density by, if you can afford the desiccated organ supplements, that's a great strategy. If you can't afford those, liver is one of the cheapest meats on the planet.
Yeah.
Right?
And I hear of people
So,
like cutting it up in small pieces and freezing it and just swallowing these little pieces if
yeah,
they
if
can't
they
handle
can, yeah,
the taste of it.
the taste. And actually, it's interesting. I did taste raw liver once. It actually tastes, it's
No, I
less offensive.
disagree. No,
then
it's offensive. I mean, I tried it in spaghetti sauce. I heard with tomato sauce, it was better. I heard
no,
put
I
it
can
with
make,
bacon. So I made it with bacon.
I can feed you liver that you'll eat. My son hates liver. But there's a trick to liver. First of all, there's one of the tricks to liver is if you have a good butcher, they have what they call a butcher blend. And what they'll do is they'll grind ground beef with some of the organs, whatever organs they have. So liver, they might use sweetbreads, which is I believe thymus, or kidneys or whatever. And so it might be 25% of the organs with 75% of the meat. Then if you spice them up, because, being a Moroccan of Moroccan descent, I use a lot of spices, not hot spices, but flavorful spices. You'd be shocked.
Okay. I'm coming over for dinner. Matt,
I've slid them by.
To ask more.
Many people. No, I've slid them by many people, or in a good chili. Like you can make a great no bean chili. You'd never in a million years guess it's there. So you might have to work at it a little bit. But it's accessible, it's doable. You might have to put a little bit more effort in, but it's doable. So,
but they're not taken, like they're a little on the expensive side, not too bad,
100%.
But the way you take them, let's talk about that, because you don't take them every day. Well, you might.
No, so it depends, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the 2-word answer that people are starting to dread from me. It depends.
Yeah.
So if you're trying, like I said before, if you're trying to correct an imbalance, you're going to end up having to use them for a lot longer, right? You might start with a 30-day induction period and then go to 10 days a month for a few months until you start to see things shift. On the other hand, if you're, let's say, in your mid to late 30s or your early 40s and you're really healthy and you're like, well, maybe I should just use a little bit, right? Maybe I just want to, it's like doing maintenance work instead of doing heavy repair work. So in that case, you might do a 30-day cycle once or twice a year, 6 months apart, right?
Yeah.
And as you get older, you might do that more often.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, which is how they've done that. And they've shown that it's been effective.
100%. And in the Russian study of the elderly, the 65 to 85 the 65 to 85 year olds, they only took the bioregulators for 2 years.
Okay.
Right. They didn't take them for 12 years. They took them for 2 years. And it seemed to have a massive impact on their ability to fend off disease and to be healthier.
Okay. Yeah. But so typically if we're trying to target something, it's, a 30-day taking them daily and then 10 days a month for a year, maybe.
It doesn't have to be a year. It could be 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
I mean, it could be until you start to see a shift, right?
Yeah.
Like you might, I don't think you would do them for a year necessarily at 10 days. I think that would be overkill. Sometimes they're not the thing that's going to move the needle. Sometimes there's something in the way.
Right.
That's blocking that regeneration. Like, don't forget, if you've got a co-infection or a massive inflammation or Lyme disease or EBV, whatever the case, or parasite, like you've got to take away the source of the assault to really make ground. It might help you to tread water, right? But you're not going to be able to solve the problem unless you can kind of get to what's driving it in the first place.
Yeah. I'd love to see there's an ovary one, and I would love to see a study done on perimenopausal and menopausal women, just to like healthy women that don't have the co-infections or anything like that, to see, maybe if they did that with the epitalon, to see what that would do for their hormonal system. I know that it's not going to bring back the hormones, but I wonder if it would preserve them a little, the ovaries just that little bit longer, or help with some of the, side effects of the hormonal loss, the hot flashes, the, cardiovascular disease, et cetera. Like it would be so great to see that.
Yeah. But anecdotally, it's certainly, and the closer to menopause you start, the better, right? But anecdotally, I would say that yes, we're seeing that kind of easing, that flattening of some of these menopausal symptoms. It doesn't replace VHRT, but can it make the transition easier? Potentially. But I want to say that there's other things we need to be doing at the same time, like things like using a senolytic formula, right? Reducing the load of senescent cells in the body, essentially take out the trash. It's really hard to
What are
build a
some
new kitchen.
senolytic
Compounds.
supplements? Compounds.
So there's one in particular that I really like. That's by a company called Qualia Senolytic. And it's a formula of a bunch of herbal extracts. You take 6 capsules 2 days a month. And that provides a pulse to clear a bunch of senescent cells out of the body. And then you go on your merry way. And then, so again, depending on your age and stage, you might do it once a quarter if you're younger. But at my age, I'm trying to do it once a month, right? Just because we focus so much on what can I take? What can I add? What can I do? We often forget, what do I need to take away?
Yeah.
What do I need to remove to lay the groundwork, right? Or using something like a MitoPure, which is like urolithin A, that drives mitophagy. So it drives the clearing of damaged and broken mitochondria to leave space for new mitochondria to take over. And they have amazing clinical trials of that stuff that shows that not only does it improve sports performance, which was the first thing they looked at, but it also improves immune performance, and it helps the heart, and it helps the brain. It helps all the things.
Was that the little thing that looked like putty that you gave me?
Oh, that was, so they make it as a gummy, but the gummy's not even available commercially yet. You would take it. I had a whey protein shake this morning with it, which was amazing, but I'm not going to lie. It's a pricey protein shake because it's got the urolithin A in it and the whey protein, but they also make it as a gel caps. So you just pop 2 gel caps a day, or they've got these little sachets of powder. They have either a berry flavor or a ginger flavor, and you can throw it into a smoothie or throw it into your yogurt, your Cocoa Yo in the morning, if you're lucky enough to be in the States and buy it, our favorite brand.
So that's uranethylate, Qualia Senolytic. And so is this all on your website, Nat?
So if you go to my Nat Recommends page, you'll find it there. It's urolithin A. Urolithin A is the downstream metabolite of ellagic acid, which is the compound in pomegranates that is super anti-aging. The problem is you would need to drink so much pomegranate juice that our friend Danny Hamilton would have to take you out, because you would go
your blood sugar.
Your blood sugar would be through the roof. So
and she will take you out. Trust me. I convinced her to eat corn chips, and she almost murdered me afterwards because her blood sugar spiked so bad.
I was there. She talked about it for days.
She was like, it was like she was doing something so bad. She's eating corn chips. She's like, I can't believe I'm eating these without like a protein or something. She's like, my blood sugar is going to be affected. I'm like, nah, you'll be fine. And she's wearing a CGM, and she's like, Karen, look. I'm like, okay, sorry. I won't pressure you anymore to eat corn chips.
But you had guacamole right there. I can't believe she didn't eat guacamole.
Right? I know. Just hilarious. Yeah. So just, we got a couple more minutes here. I've heard you talk about that it's better to take the bioregulators in groups because of the way the organ system, in stacks, the way the organ systems function together, that it is more beneficial to kind of group some together. Can you talk about a couple of those groups that would be good?
Yeah. So actually, I don't know if it's on my website. It's probably in my Mighty Networks group, but there's a few stacks that Dr. Cavinson kind of has highlighted. But I will say that the main anti-aging stack or healthy aging stack would be your pineal gland bioregulator. So Apeiron, your blood vessel bioregulator, because if you can restore function to the endothelium of your blood vessels, yay. And that gets nutrients to the cells and removes waste products from the cells. And then the thymus gland bioregulator. So you've got pineal gland, immune system, and blood vessels. That, to me, that triad, if you did nothing else, would be a beautiful, beautiful thing. You can also, like, if somebody has a heart issue, you would use the heart bioregulator, the blood vessel bioregulator. If they also have, if they also had, let's say, if blood pressure and kidneys were challenged, you might add in a kidney bioregulator with that, right? But the pineal gland and blood vessel bioregulators keep showing up over and over and over again.
Oh, okay.
Right? Like that blood vessel bioregulator underpins a lot of protocols, because proper blood supply, blood flow is critical to whether you're dealing with a cognitive issue, or you're dealing with a digestive issue, Or they did a really cool study on athletes where they used the brain, the central nervous system, pineal, the central nervous system bioregulator with the muscle bioregulator. And they found after a couple of months that their sports performance improved because you're improving the communication potentially between the brain and the muscle, right?
What about for hormones? Because there's an adrenal gland one, right?
So there's an adrenal one for adrenal support.
Glandicord.
Yeah, there's a thyroid one for the thyroid. We've got the ovarian one. We've got thymus. I mean, I would challenge you also on hormones that you might want to give the liver some love.
Yes. Yep.
Right.
Yeah, I would think that those would be a great combo. I did have a woman, she's in your group, and she came to me too, and we were looking at her hormones, and she had 2 Dutch tests that she did, I want to say within probably 3 to 6 months of each other. And so the first one showed really low levels of all of her hormones. She went on the ovary, and I think she combined it with a couple of the other ones, but she definitely did the ovary bioregulator. 6 months later, around that, she retested. All of her hormone levels had come up. Not like
That's
massive,
incredible.
but they were definitely up.
Trending. Yeah.
Trending up. And I was like,
Amazing.
wow. I'm like, I wish so many people would do this. Like the before and after.
Cool, right?
Yes.
That's so, I mean, never mind cool. I mean, it speaks to the power of the body to heal when we give it the right stimulus.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Completely.
So I think stories like that are super inspiring.
Yeah.
I think bioregulators are not the be all end all, and they are a really powerful little tool in our toolkit that can move the needle in ways that are also harmless, right? So this is the other thing that Dr. Kevinson speaks to all the time. 1,000,000 doses, no side effects, no negative effects. The only thing I've seen, the only thing I will add is for people that are very, very sensitive or have very pronounced autoimmune issues, they might have to start at a lower dose.
Okay.
Right. So instead of taking 2 capsules a day, you might start at 1 a day. They even talk about, in some cases, they've used them with kids, not necessarily saying you should, but then in that case, they'll open the capsule and use a quarter of a capsule. They'll just use less. So, you know, it's a little bit of art and a lot of science. But if you have a bad reaction to something, stop it. Sometimes it's what you think it is. Sometimes it's something else. It's a coincidence. These because they look for homeostasis, because they're trying to bring the body back into balance. And that's the other thing I want to say. They're not going to push you into superhuman performance here. They're just going to try to get you back to baseline. The optimization piece, the going above the baseline piece, that's going to be other stuff.
Okay.
This stuff is going to get you to the baseline. You can't optimize from below. You have to get to that baseline before you can think about optimizing.
And if somebody wanted to test their telomeres and their DNA methylation, is that a kit that we can buy online somewhere, or do you have to go through a practitioner? Yeah.
No, you can go to truediagnostic.com and you can order. They also have a test included called the pace of aging test. And it's telling you, are you aging slower or faster than your age? Which is super amazing. So, I mean, that's all on my Nat Recommends page also, if anybody's interested, but.
And you've got a new group, newish group that started last year, where it's a Mighty Networks group. It's a membership. And so if you guys want to hear more information, it's so funny because now, since Nat and I have been talking with each other, we've been on each other's podcasts, we share a lot of clientele between our groups, between our membership groups. It's like, oh, I heard of you from Nat's podcast. I want my hormones, dialed in. And then people are going, I know so many of my members have gone over to your Mighty Networks group and joined because they wanted more information on peptides.
Oh yeah. They're
so
like,
that's an option.
Karen sent me.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, all that you can learn about natniddam.com and just go to BSP community at the top of the page. That's the community group. And then if you're interested in the retreat tab at the top of the page. And
yeah, perfect.
That's it.
And I'm sure that everybody now, since listening to you, have also started their own little Nat recommends list, right, ladies? And I'll put all the links that we've talked about here today. I'm going to put those in the show notes. And then of course you can always go over to natniddam.com and get whatever you need from her recommendation page. So thank you, my friend. I want to have you on all the time.
Well, you need to come back onto my
I
podcast
know.
now because we need to dive into more hormone stuff. So
I know, because our first ones were very just kind of superficial, just some basic information on each other's podcast. Now I feel like, okay, now we got to do more shows where we dive deep into certain topics, because the
100%.
two go so perfectly together for middle-aged women to dial in these peptides and bioregulator peptides and then the hormones. It's just they're the perfect little match to make women feel amazing. And since I've talked to you, I've now started my own peptide weight loss group, and the results have been extraordinary. And you were the one that really introduced me to those, so I really appreciate that. I heard about them the first time on your podcast, so now I've been able to help all of these women to lose that midlife weight gain with the use of these peptides, which has been absolutely amazing. And I know you've had a lot of women too that have used them for that same purpose. And it's great. So when we dial in all of these factors and we are going through this midlife experience, like strong and able, and we're reversing our aging. Like, come on, this is exciting. This is way better than Botox.
Way better. Way better than Botox, 100%.
All right. Well, thanks again. And I look forward to having you on all the time.
Well, feeling is 100% mutual. So
Yes.
thank you so much for having me, Karen. Talk soon.